Right, so it's to nobody's surprise at all that Israel have significant influence at the top of all manner of political parties and governments. We certainly know that here in this country, with both the government and Rishi Sunak and the opposition led by that Zionist without qualification Keir Starmer, they're both completely beholden to them. Witnessing what we are seeing in Palestine and in the Gaza Strip, though, it is now that we need strong leadership to call for a ceasefire, and not quislings you'd rather see genocide play out and Gaza turn into a graveyard for children. It isn't just this country afflicted by weak leadership, though, as sadly it is extending into Europe too. There are politicians out there, though, on the right side of history. Some of the most notable come from Ireland, as it happens. If you aren't familiar with the MEP Claire Daly and her firebrand speeches, then you're missing out. She gave a belter this week, which I'll come to, because it really is worth paying attention to. But as far as this country and its weak leaderships go, well, Brexit or not, we're still linked to Europe, and sadly, for as much as a number was done on Jeremy Corbyn on the right side of history, as he is once again here, a disinvitation from a left-wing think tank event because of the pro-Israeli views of the venue, shows Europe have a long way to go to catch up with the wishes of the majority of not just British citizens, but European citizens as well. Right, so what's happened to Corbyn here then, Damo? Well, he was due to speak in Berlin on the Future of Europe event that was going on this week, Wednesday through Friday, 3-day event, part of the annual conference this year called Europe for the Councils, held by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, a German left-wing think tank which is closely aligned with the German Die Linke Party. The name literally means the left, and it is Germany's Democratic Socialist Party, analogous to what Labour is supposed to be, rather than the paler shade of Tory that it's become under Keir No Ceasefire Starmer. Unfortunately, the venue for this year's conference, the Volksbühne Theatre in Berlin, objected to Corbyn's presence. A spokesman or a spokesperson for the theatre said, "Due to Jeremy Corbyn's current stance on the Middle East conflict, we have decided not to offer him a public audience at the Volksbühne." The issue apparently is because Corbyn is pro-Palestinian, in that he wants a ceasefire and he wants to see an end to the occupation of Israel in Palestine. He wants Israel to be held to account in international law. But the theatre is a little sensitive about this, as Germany is still in light of its own occupation past. You can understand things from that perspective, but you still can't excuse censoring someone and disinviting them on that basis when all the guy wants to call for is peace. He didn't explicitly condemn Hamas, so yes, that media question we're all sick of seeing pro-Palestinian activists being asked. That was the issue, because it frames the narrative on what is going on in the Middle East in a certain light, the light of establishment interests, of overwhelmingly, it seems, pro-Israeli interests. It doesn't matter that Corbyn called out all attacks, no matter who it was doing the attack in. He's seen as being on Palestine's side, and for this venue, it seems that was a deal breaker. Now, the whole point of this conference, particularly that which Corbyn was supposed to be involved in, was to look at what Europe could look like going forwards, and so the EU comes into this picture as well, as the topic really that was being discussed for 3 days. Could we have a Europe not run by stuck-up and aloof bureaucrats, your Ursula von der Leyens, for example, ardently pro-Israel and extending Europe's hand to them despite having no mandate of her own to do so? What about a citizen-led EU instead? Co-determination by the people of Europe. Increased democratic participation. A left-wing idea of a Europe going forwards and what could be. Some of you hearing this might figure it's for the birds, and seeing how low the right wing will stoop in order to retain power and concentrate power for themselves. Well, we saw what they did to Corbyn, didn't we? We know how hard a fight they'd put up to hang on to power, because power is all-consuming and all that matters to them. But still, it's all very much another way is possible kind of a conversation that was happening. And we have to hang on to hope that that is true, because there's precious little hope going on, or anywhere now, around us now, certainly in our politics, for anything changing in our favour. Coming back to the here and now on the matter of Israel and Palestine, but particularly on Israel, the EU is a huge supplier of Israeli weaponry. It isn't just coming from us or the US. Germany and Italy between them provide some 30% of Israeli weaponry. So again, Germany boycotting Corbyn, you can kind of see our own national reaction reflected in Germany's response, can't you? A man of peace, a jam-making vegetable botherer. Well, he's the real threat, they want to tell us. As hospitals get bombed in Gaza, attacks possibly made with German or Italian military hardware involved. They're still very sensitive about their own history, though, I remind you. Less so when it appears to be happening elsewhere. Even with their help, it would appear. The hypocrisy is writ large, and this seems a good point to bring in the aforementioned Claire Daly to this picture. Where our main opposition party in this country is firmly on the side of the government on this issue, in the EU, well, some of the most legendary opposition firebrands going happen to be amongst the Irish members of the European Parliament, and one whose profile has definitely been growing on social media, especially, is Claire Daly. Now, Daly is part of the left of the European parliamentary bloc and is an MEP for the left-wing Irish party Independence for Change. Proper lefty, and she is one that does not pull her punches, and that's been especially true when it comes to the gushing overtures of Ursula von der Leyen towards the State of Israel. If we're to see the kind of change us rotten lefties wants to see, not just in Europe but here in the UK or anywhere in the world, frankly, Israel, especially the replacement of the hard-right Zionist regime of Benjamin Netanyahu, can't come fast enough. Well, then we need to have people who won't take any of this kind of sycophantic overture to the right, the likes of von der Leyen, come out with. The left needs some fire in their belly, and Daly, in a frankly brutal take, I will use the word brutal takedown of von der Leyen just last Friday, shows exactly what I mean by that. She took to the stand to condemn the lack of a call for a ceasefire, and Ursula von der Leyen's arse cheeks will have been glowing red by the end of it from the burn she got. Daly said, "A month has elapsed since the commencement of the unrelenting mass murder of Palestinians in Gaza. It's not a spiral of violence, Frau von der Leyen. It's genocide, openly declared and carried out by the apartheid state of Israel. Starvation and bombing hospitals, ambulances, journalists and humanitarian routes. 10,000 dead, 1 in 200 Gazans killed, a Palestinian child slaughtered every 10 minutes for a month. And Frau von der Leyen's answer to this graveyard for children is to tell Israel to avoid civilians. Be as targeted as you can." Well, that displays some neck. You can't even call for it to stop. You can't even call for a ceasefire. Well, of course you can't, because these crimes against humanity are being carried out with your weapons in your name when you stood with Israel a month ago and you said you'd stand with them now and in the days to come. So don't come in here trying to wipe the blood off with belated concern. It's not just Israel's genocide, it's yours, and The Hague isn't good enough for you. Mic drop. Those words could be aimed at any of our alleged leaders here, though. People who refuse to lead but follow the US narrative, the European narrative, and won't alter their stances until someone else does first. Anyone not backing an immediate ceasefire, the blood of Gazans is on your hands as well. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content up daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where, like Ursula von der Leyen, Keir Starmer seemingly has no red lines for Israel where a ceasefire would be called either, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so today's got off to quite a start, hasn't it? Two massive stories, frankly, in that Suella Braverman has finally been sacked, and the appointments and mini reshuffle that has gone on as a result of that. To be honest, all too much to cover in a single video. So we will deal with Braverman here, and my video later will cover who's come in, because it really does show how desperate Sunak has become. And the really big reason for that is, of course, because Suella Braverman had remained in post for all of this time, despite everything she has done in the last year, the damage, the fallout, the harm she has been a driver of. Because Sunak, in order to shore up his own leadership, needed the hard right of his party to support him. By rights, he had no choice but to act after the scenes at the Cenotaph on Saturday. Braverman should have been sacked after what we saw on Armistice Day, sacked immediately before that day was out. Instead, Sunak has let it fester all weekend, completely in keeping with his habitual inability to lead. But now he's had to ditch her. The splits with a significant chunk of his own party have begun already as a result. Right, so first things first, ding dong, Cruella's gone. Hooray! We can all celebrate that one, can't we? Let's get the party poppers out, let's pop a few off. A day we were beginning to think would never come, would anything see this bloody woman removed from her post? Because it looked like Sunak had no control over her whatsoever. She had free rein, seemingly, to do and say whatever she liked, driving Home Office policy that Sunak would, if not repeat, certainly quietly go along with, as we've seen in the recent tense or lifestyle choice issue. For my part, I really didn't think Sunak had it in him. I had another Braverman story planned for today, and this has completely wrecked it, so thanks very much, Rishi, for that. What I was going to talk about today was the upcoming court ruling due on Wednesday regarding Braverman's Rwanda deportation plans. She does dream of them, you know. The government are almost certainly going to lose that. But Braverman had cancelled all border force Christmas leave just the other month. So all the signs were there, and still are there actually, there's no saying her replacement will row back on this, that the Tories may seek to carry on regardless, ramming this through, court ruling or not. Certainly the signs were there by cancelling said leave, that Braverman was prepared to do that, and I felt that was certainly worth talking about. But we will now have to see what happens on Wednesday before delving into that story any further. The other rumour concerning this issue was that Braverman would of course resign if she didn't get her way on Wednesday. We will never know now. But if Sunak was aware of this, well, that might have helped him find his spine to act against her ahead of that, a couple of days early, to look all big and bad and hard and failing completely. I'm not convinced of it in any way, shape or form of that story, though. She has had ample opportunity to quit in disgrace for numerous reasons up until now. Sunak has had numerous reasons to sack her up until now, but hasn't. Let's not forget she originally did resign for breaching the ministerial code under Liz Truss, the whole Leaky Sue story, if you remember. She shared secure information, a draft written statement on migration deemed sensitive due to its implication on future immigration policy via her own private and far less secure email. She pulled a Hillary Clinton, just to refresh your memory. And she'd broken the ministerial code again under Sunak previously and didn't hint at leaving. And she's just spent her time staying in post, daring him to sack her seemingly instead, undermining the police finally being Sunak's reason for acting as she did most recently, breaking the ministerial code as she did. But she had also broken it back in May for trying to get civil servants, remember this story, to find a way to quash a speeding fine. Though a cynic might say Truss's time was up and Braverman jumped before getting soiled with the fallout of that farce of a government in that instance, and that's why she didn't resign over the speeding ticket. Let's take a look at Braverman's last year and some of the shit she's pulled that she's got away with, though, that Sunak has allowed her to carry on regardless after committing. She oversaw immigration centres like Manston Detention Centre fall apart to the point they were losing track of kids and the place was being referred to as a concentration camp, such were the bad conditions there. She opted to throw even more money at France to stop the boats, even though they couldn't possibly patrol their entire coastline. It's proven before, with the failure of Priti Patel doing exactly the same thing, but Braverman thought, no, let's throw some more money at it. She's repeatedly claimed there are safe asylum routes for people, for example, fleeing Afghanistan, or, notably, where civil war broke out in Sudan back in April, despite there very not being any. She completely lied about all of that. She wanted to x-ray immigrant children, literally x-ray them, because she didn't believe all those claiming to be kids possibly could be. Some of them are bum fluff, they must be at least 24, and had to be told by the NHS there was no capacity for this. There was already a backlog, you see, and, well, there still is, isn't there? She once lectured a Holocaust survivor on what a refugee actually is. That takes some neck. She has accused refugees of smuggling drugs, of course. She's been embroiled in an expensive scandal too, when it turned out her parents let her stay rent-free at a house they owned in Braverman's constituency, because of course Suella Braverman doesn't live there, despite her claiming rent on expenses. She dreams of deportation, she told us, quite the twisted mind. Her Rwanda deportation scheme turning out to be a bit of a cash for humans scheme, and it turns out she had vested interest herself in the Rwandan state through a law charity that she'd set up along with Tony Blair's wife, Cherie. That was another breach of the ministerial code, incidentally, since she never declared any of that. She's so deeply unpleasant, she's been called all manner of things, but not least of which a racist bigot by parliamentary members of her own party. She got her obscene illegal migration bill passed, and then attempted to get bits that had been struck out passed anyway afterwards via secondary legislation, and would have gotten away with it too if not for pesky Green Party peer Jenny Jones leading the opposition against it. We've already seen her heavy-handedness when it comes to the Met, because the coronation, if you remember, became a bit of a circus, didn't it, of unjustified detentions and arrests, though the Met thankfully stood firm this time around regarding this weekend gone's Peace March. She wanted to keep refugees on prison barges and succeeded for a little while too. Two of these barges got turned away in Scotland and Liverpool, but the one that stayed turned out to be full of Legionella. She was found to have broken the law by denying a £3 payment, £3, to pregnant women in hotels and to young children, which left them all malnourished. She got so incensed by legal blocks stopping her deportations that she even went as far as threatening to jail all the lawyers who carried on doing that, those rotten lefty lawyers. She kept claiming Rwanda was a safe country, of course. She's been saying that on and on and on, despite military action breaking out on two of its borders this year versus the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Burundi. She's blamed the police for rising crime and demanded they sort it out by just working harder. And she also interfered, of course, in a live court case where a police officer fatally shot an unarmed black man, thus adding to their workload further and also, again, breaching the ministerial code. She's blamed smartphones and jet travel for rising refugee arrivals rather than her own inability to do her job and to deal with the situation and bring in safe asylum routes and investing in dealing with the backlog. And let's not forget all the demonisation of just about every protected demographic there is. She should have been sacked more than a dozen times over just in the past year. But of course her place in government was assured because Rishi Sunak needed the support of the right-wing backbenchers and the ERG faction that Braverman belonged to. Well, that's now gone, of course, and already dissent is emerging. Andrea Jenkins, the first member of the ERG to put their head above the parapet at time of writing, she's the current ERG deputy chair, well, she tweeted out, "I support Suella Braverman. Sacked for speaking the truth. Bad call by Rishi, caving into the..." Well, there's a novelty in thinking there is any such thing as a left of the Tory party, but then she is as mad as a box of frogs. The actual chair of the ERG, actually, you might have forgotten about this chap, is a rather diminutive chap called Mark Francois. He's been oddly silent for quite a while, hasn't he? Most uncharacteristic of him, I can't imagine why. It isn't just the Tory MPs crying about this, though, but the right-wing mouthpieces in the media too. Murdoch Radio's Julia Hartley-Brewer. Well, she's gone on one. And she's bleated out today, "If you watch the horrible events on the streets of London on Saturday and you've concluded that Suella Braverman is the person to blame, then you are part of the problem. When your house is on fire, don't blame the person shouting fire. Blame the arsenal." That's just a really strange thing to say. I think Suella Braverman has been going around government with a petrol can starting enough fires, thank you. Not a good analogy at all, Julia. Expect more Tories to come out of the woodwork, squealing like pigs about precious Suella to come, and the media too. But speaking of pigs, don't forget to look out for the next vid on Rishi's reshuffle later today. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Braverman's antics, you should have seen her sacked, were the emboldening of the hard right, the fascists, to descend on London on Armistice Day to desecrate the proceedings, rather than just yet more criticism of the police, which she has done on multiple occasions before without punishment. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next bit. Cheers, folks. Right, so with Braverman gone, I've covered that in another video earlier today, if you've not seen it. The mood turned to Sunak's reshuffle. But as much as he's dragged his feet in getting around to sacking Braverman in the aftermath of the awful scene seen by the cenotaph on Saturday, he hasn't hung around replacing her with the former Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, always a Tory loyalist. But if the most misnamed MP in Parliament is what passes for a safe pair of hands for Rishi Sunak, he's in an enormous amount of trouble. And as if to underline just how little talent he has to choose from, Cleverly's replacement at the Foreign Office is causing justifiable anger and outrage and disbelief, frankly, as former Prime Minister and architect of austerity, the source of so much of the poverty we see today, David Cameron, not an MP, so has been hurriedly put into the House of Lords instead, yet another unelected member of that overstuffed second chamber, so that Sunak can appoint him to head the Foreign Office. Call Me Dave is back in all his ham-faced, hugger-hoodie harmfulness. Right, so we've got rid of a hard right harridan for which there will be much justifiable celebration. Of course there will. We don't get very much good news these days after all, do we? Braverman dumped back on the back benches, but you have to wonder for how long the way things are to be replaced by the useless idiot James Cleverly. It tickles me somewhat to imagine the guy now in charge of our police is a guy who once tried to deny he'd been on his phone during a road traffic collision. But this is part of the course now with the Tories, isn't it? Don't expect for much to change, though. Islamophobia will continue, for one. He once denied that it even exists because Islam is not a race. Well, you can say the same about Judaism, can't you? But I bet you won't deny the existence of anti-Semitism, eh, Jimbo? How about that time you laughed off fellow Tory MP Desmond Swayne doing blackface, though? Like I said, most misnamed MP in Parliament. The irony is so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Putting him in charge of anything is like trusting a goldfish with the nation's nuclear codes. Well, do you have anything to say on your first day as Home Secretary then, James? Well, of course he did. Have a guess what he might have chosen to talk about. He said, "It's been a huge privilege to serve as Foreign Secretary, and in that time I've worked closely with my colleagues in the Home Office, cracking down on migration, reducing the number of small boat arrivals, and now as the Home Secretary, I'm absolutely committed to stopping the boats as we promised." Yeah, it's like Leaky Sue never left, isn't it? Stop the boats! Stop the boats! Stop the boats! In case you didn't realise as well, Jimbo, number of boat arrivals have increased this year. You've not helped reduce them at all, though I very much doubt a legal safe asylum route is on your agenda any more than it was on Suella Braverman's. But cleverly getting another elevated ministerial post he has no talent for really isn't the big story. In fact, his replacement at the Foreign Office is arguably a bigger story even than Braverman getting sacked, because nobody saw it coming. But because Rishi Sunak is so desperate for talent that even amongst 331 Tory MPs, he can't find one with enough talent to replace someone as talentless as James Cleverly. Unbelievably, and completely out of the blue, it seems, David Cameron is back, coming in to hold his first ever ministerial brief outside of that of being the Prime Minister, whose austerity has destroyed the social fabric of the country as it has. Dodgy Dave, the shiny-faced pig fancier himself, returns, but in order to be appointed Foreign Secretary, given that he's not an MP, he ran away after Brexit blew up in his face, didn't he? Remember that? Left us with Theresa May. He's been hurriedly stuffed into the House of Lords, life peerage, completely unelected as that is, meaning we have a completely unelected Foreign Secretary being appointed by our completely unelected Prime Minister. Democracy, don't you just love it? Well, how has this just gone down with Tory MPs? Well, a leaked WhatsApp came about quite shortly after this announcement came out, as there always seems to be. There's always a leaked WhatsApp with the Tories, isn't there? On the news of this appointment, and it read, "I will resist pointing out that David Cameron is mired in Greensill, the largest lobbying scandal to hit the government. He had to resign because he failed to stand up to the EU and is completely gutless. He won't be able to address the House of Commons whilst we are witnessing two major conflicts. He's an unelected Foreign Secretary appointed by an unelected Prime Minister." That was leaked to Sky's Sophie Ridge by a Tory MP from one of their groups. It's a horrible thought to think that they were thinking the same way as I was. All of that, of course, is true. The Greensill lobbying scandal, if you're not familiar with it, it's where David Cameron was working for them for £1 million a year for just 25 days' work, I might add. And in that time, he secured a £5 million worth in government contracts, plural, for them the year before they went bust. But that wasn't before Dodgy Dave sold his shares in Greensill for some £7 million. It was as if he might have seen it coming. Let's not stop there, though. He's also working for a US biotech called Illumina. They got a £123 million government contract. You can guess where when it's that size, can't you? From Matt Hancock via the PPE VIP lane. Yes, it's another one of those scandals. How about the Paradise Papers? Remember them? He was involved in tax fiddles with that, wasn't he? That was his family. If he's going to come back into government, would now be a good time to investigate those tax affairs then? We know he ran away when Brexit blew up in his face, and now he's back seemingly to fill his pockets once more, because he can never have enough. He's in the Foreign Office with his trotters up, as Danny Dyer might have put it. As a member of the House of Lords, he cannot actually take any questions in the Commons, which is something the WhatsApp alluded to. Therefore, he will have to send out junior ministers each and every time that Foreign Office questions are being called. Regarding those two conflicts that were alluded to in the WhatsApps as well, most pertinently, which being the ones between Russia and Ukraine and the ones in Palestine and Gaza. Israel and Gaza even. As far as the first conflict goes, the Tory party have always been rolling in rubles. They do love their Russian donors, don't they? And Cameron, much like Boris Johnson had no trouble taking Russian money, yet remain constantly repeating that they aren't buying influence. Well, of course they are. They wouldn't give you any money otherwise, would they, if they weren't buying something? It's what all donors do. You'd have to be as thick as James Cleverly to think otherwise. And that goes for all parties who take sizable donations from wealthy vested interests. Yes, I'm looking at you as well, Keir Starmer. On the matter of Israel and Palestine, though, Cameron has a very two-faced track record. When first elected, Cameron had it right when he referred to the Gaza Strip as a giant open prison. But then, being a Tory, they all have their price, don't they? A price for their principles. And Dodgy Dave's were up for sale to the point that by 2015 he became a born-again Netanyahu fanboy and was described by Israeli paper Haaretz as the most pro-Israel British Prime Minister ever. And the evidence is there for it. Under his administration, they changed the law to protect Israelis from arrest for war crimes, failed to call attacks on Gaza disproportionate, just as we're seeing ministers and shadow ministers do now. They consistently oversaw a lack of support for Palestine at the UN and tried to block Palestinians from joining the International Criminal Court. Just what exactly was your price in the end over that then, Dave? Cameron's foreign policy history is nothing to be proud of either. For the one standout example of his foreign policy, just look at the state of Libya, still to this day. Bombed to hell to remove Colonel Gaddafi, and it fell to ISIS straight after because nobody stayed behind to make sure the country was put back together again. Political and economic collapse ensued, from which it has never recovered. It now remains a rogue state with slave markets still. Sunak's Tories are not happy about this appointment. Labour will no doubt be crowing about Sunak having to dig up relics of the past to shore up his government. But when Starmer had to dig up Peter Mandelson from the 1990s to hold his hand, those blows aren't likely to land. Both parties are looking backwards to past success in the hope for future ones and offer nothing, certainly not change, by doing so. Speaking of Starmer, given he's basically filled the niche Sunak left as the Tories have gone ever more right-wing and become the David Cameron in Parliament, I don't quite know what he'll do now he's facing a government with the real thing in it. I think we should all spare a thought for Nadine Dorries as well at this point. She spent an entire year holding her own constituents for ransom, wanting a peerage and being denied it, and here comes David Cameron out of nowhere and just taking one anyway. God bless. Back to writing crap books for you it is. One problem for Sunak that isn't going to go away, though, is the issue of the ERG. Suella Braverman going means their support for Sunak is gone, and neither Cleverly nor Cameron are going to placate them. Cameron was terrified of the ERG, and I doubt that has changed. We know when things get tough, Dave does a runner, and he's set for life now in the Lords, come what may. Dennis Skinner said it best when he stood in Parliament and said of Cameron, "This man has done more to divide this nation than anybody else. He's looked after his own pockets. I still refer to him as Dodgy Dave." Cameron's politics was responsible for 330,000 excess deaths due to austerity. That's his legacy. Skinner is right in that during his tenure as PM and since leaving Parliament, all he's done is enrich himself. Now he's back. That can never be a good thing. But it's also symbolic of the Tory party itself that they're done for. This is the best they can do, bringing back damaged goods that can't even be held to account directly. It's a sham. If David Cameron is your solution, there's no saving you. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation for you where perhaps Cameron might bring the donors back to Rishi Sunak's aid. They were threatening to defund him just last month, after all. Who knows? Maybe this is why he's really back. Bring in some more of those Russian rubles. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so a new law just passed in Israel's Knesset appears to be a ramping up of their weaponization of anti-Semitism when it comes to criticism of their country. They believe that Israel should be treated differently, and to not do so is to be a racist thing. It's a narrative we've seen play out for years now. They believe they should be held to a different set of rules because of the historic suffering of the Jewish people. And with a hardline right-wing Zionist government as they've had for the last 16 years, by and large under Benjamin Netanyahu. The targets of this new law, however, are not Gazans or Palestinians generally, though, but actually anyone from anywhere else in the world who is critical of what they've been up to, frankly, since the Nakba in 1948, but of course very much now as their actions have been more exposed and brought into sharp focus against a backdrop of over 11,000 deaths in Gaza. The settler mentality, the apartheid, the keeping of Gazans in an open-air prison, the targeting of civilians. Israel is having a very hard job in its pursuit of still playing the victim, and accusations of racism, if you don't agree with them, are falling on deaf ears more and more. So this new law is designed not to designate potentially anybody being critical of Israel as racist anymore. No, they will now be looking to designate anyone criticising them as a terrorist. So that's anyone calling them out for what they're doing, and you can point to a whole host of people globally that this might apply to. But to carry weight, it has to be people of prominence to get it going, to be accused of such a thing first of all. They're the sort of people that they're going to be going for with this. And in this country, we have one very obvious target in Jeremy Corbyn, who is advocating for a ceasefire now, as he has done for years. Not just because violence has ramped up all of a sudden now since October, but he's been doing it for years and years and years now. And because he's still living rent-free in the heads of so many pro-Israel individuals as he does, is he an obvious target for this new law to be deployed against? Right, so Israel's new law is frankly ridiculous and is basically putting their right to claim victimhood, as it were, on their own statute books, even as they seemingly level Gaza block by block. Instead of relying on anti-Semitism to hide behind, because it's not getting through like Hitler used to anymore, is it? they're now going to accuse those criticising them instead of being terrorists. Well, surely they can't just arbitrarily do that then, Damo, you might be thinking. Other states around the world will not stand for such slander against their own citizens, especially in countries that are known to be critical of the current regime. Well, there's plenty of other countries that have been acquiescing to Israel for decades. Many foreign politicians do it. Notably our own are bought and paid for via donations, infiltrated as political organisations. You don't end up with a Zionist without qualification like Keir Starmer leading a major party and looking set to be the next Prime Minister by accident, because, of course, the pro-Israeli donors are the people that put him in that position. And you just look across at the Labour Party as a whole. Look at all the members of Labour Friends of Israel who, again, have accepted donations and hospitality from pro-Israeli sources. Look at the Labour National Executive Committee itself, with its member Luke Akers sat there, and he's a paid advocate for the State of Israel. And of course, our media are just as weak on the issue of Israel too. In fact, some can be downright abusive in their defence of that victim narrative that Israel seems to covet. Ultimately, if they want to have a law basically calling people in other countries' names, terrorists in this case, they can. It's the consequences of that will matter. And that will certainly vary one country to another. But in this country, with our leaders, it's probably not going to be a good thing. The way Israel have done this, though, is by amending existing legislation. They haven't done anything particularly big or clever here. They've just taken their counter-terrorist laws, which previously stated that foreign nationals could only be designated terrorists if a qualified national entity had already made that assertion. If you were already regarded a terrorist by the UN, for example, then Israel could as well. The amendment simply removed that requirement. So they can now call any organisation or any individual they like a terrorist if they want to, based on whatever evidence they choose to come up with, so often fabricated as it's seemed to be in recent weeks. It does seem to be a dangerous thing to do, attacking other countries' citizens. By rights, you would expect a given nation to stand by their own people when accused, but this is Israel. We've got to remember who we're talking about here, and there's no guarantees about that with some countries. The US will be a prime example, probably the most vociferous ally Israel has, though we here in the UK will not be far behind. With the most pro-Israel Prime Minister ever, David Cameron, now the Foreign Secretary, he won't hesitate, especially when many of those in this country calling for a ceasefire, condemning Israel's indiscriminate bombing, singling out the most hard-right Israeli government in history, and you can imagine somebody like Jeremy Corbyn will be an obvious and popular first target for somebody like Dodgy Dave, likely with Keir Starmer joining in as well. When doesn't he support the Tories these days after all? But Corbyn, he wouldn't be able to resist that, would he, Dodgy Dave? But I'll come back to that in a moment. Netanyahu is only in power because he did a deal with the far right in his country. The Otzma Yehudit party being one, Jewish Power it stands for, where a hardline settler like Itamar Ben-Gvir is now in charge of national security. Or how about a maniac like Bezalel Smotrich, leader of the also far-right religious Zionist party, who is the defence minister? It's worth paying a little bit of more attention to this guy in particular, since under the terms of this new law, it is Smotrich who will be designating who Israel deems to be a terrorist. It's the job of the defence minister. This is a guy, though, who has called Hamas an asset to Israel. The people who murdered over 1,000 of his own people on October the 7th, and he considers them useful to Israel's aims, and you can see why when it gives Israel the excuses they have done to commit genocide. The guy who will decide what constitutes terrorism is somebody who has said criminal damage or acts of vandalism against Palestinian property is not to be deemed terrorism. He supports apartheid even down to separate maternity wards in hospitals, excusing this by saying his wife would not want to lie down and give birth to a woman whose baby might want to murder her baby in 20 years' time. He's a charmer, isn't he? When Palestinians are armed with sticks and stones, they come up and they start resisting Israel. Smotrich has advocated a shoot-to-kill policy as a proportional response. I can go on. He is as nasty as you can get. This is who Netanyahu chose to get into bed with to stay in power. This is who is in charge of administering this new law or the accusations thereof. You can imagine Corbyn, the diplomat, the man of peace, the man wanting a ceasefire, having his unfortunate past comments about Hamas used against him. The context always forgotten that he was advocating for peace then too. Clumsy language in hindsight was diplomacy then. But it'd be a bit rich for him to be designated a terrorist from what he has said about Hamas in the past, that he has apologised for and regrets, by a guy who considers Hamas an asset himself. Who can deny he'd be a prime target? The media are still fixated on him. It'd give Keir Starmer an excuse, arguably, to expel him completely. Who knows? Could even lead to his arrest potentially under terrorism laws if our government really want to bend over backwards in Israel's favour on this. It's not like our politicians have done anything except line up to say Israel has a right to do what it is doing. Who's to say they won't say the same when it comes to Brits being accused of being something they blatantly are not, when all they really want is a ceasefire and peace, which none of our mainstream politicians seem to believe in backing. Calling for a ceasefire, for peace in Palestine, for freedom for Palestine, saying from the river to the sea. We don't know how this country would react to Israeli accusations of terrorism of UK citizens in such contexts as those, but I can easily see Corbyn being one of the first they'd pick on. Then could it happen to any number of us simply for calling the same thing? Israel wouldn't just go changing their laws on this for no reason at all. They plan to do something with this. Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see just how far they take that. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Corbyn got banned last week for being a peace activist from addressing the Rosa Luxemburg conference because the venue was pro-Israel too. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so we're quite used to having a media in this country centred not so much on reporting the news as much as framing it, or even literally making it, selling us a certain narrative rather than just the truth of a given situation. It's the reason my channel exists, to be fair, but seldom does that get more blatantly exposed than when you switch on one of the right-wing alleged news channels, not least the performance Piers Morgan put in last night whilst supposedly interviewing Jeremy Corbyn, the former Unite the Union boss Len McCluskey. Morgan is the journalistic equivalent of a draining rod, something that pushes and prods, resulting in all manner of nastiness, then flowing, very much stinking to high heaven, with the occasional wet wipe thrown in for good measure, snowflake that he really is. He hectored and bullied and pushed, and Corbyn, yeah, he lost his rag and he bit back. He showed some backbone, actually. But why? That bloody question of condemning Hamas, yet again. Missing the point that there's two sides to this conflict, there's wrongdoing on both sides of this conflict, but the media fixating on just one because they're on the side of the other won't deliver peace at all. Right, so Piers Morgan on his show last night had Jeremy Corbyn and former Unite the Union General Secretary Len McCluskey on. They've written a book on poetry together, don't you know? But the interview with Corbyn descended into a classic example of Morgan just battering a guest with a question that means nothing, is actually a matter of fact anyway, and doesn't seek to promote or inform the audience. But when the audience is those who happen to watch Morgan's uncensored show on Murdoch TV, Talk TV, no doubt they were cheering Morgan on as they became increasingly more and more dumbed down by his antics. Are Hamas a terrorist group is what Morgan repeated over and over and over, incessantly, boringly, as Corbyn was stopped repeatedly from making the point he was trying to get across when that question was presented to him, which is that to get a ceasefire, you have to talk to both sides. Morgan just didn't want to hear it, and more to the point, he didn't want his audience to hear it, so he thuggishly bullied Corbyn for over 2 minutes straight like this. Not that Corbyn just took it, mind. He showed some grit I wish he'd shown when he was Labour leader. Now, some watching this will say, yeah, but all Corbyn had to do was say that they were terrorists. And to that I'd say, as a leading UK politician, which he still is, he still gets platformed. He still very much lives rent-free in the heads of many proving this. It does nobody, least of all the people of Gaza, any favours. It in no way leads to that possibility of a ceasefire by calling one side of the issue terrorists, as Morgan wanted. Now, Corbyn could have said, yes, they are. He could have turned that back on Morgan by saying, oh, in addition to that, do you condemn the attacks on innocent Gazan civilians by the IDF as terrorism? Seeing the oxygen being cut off to babies and bombing ambulances, which would have put Morgan on the spot, I fancy, to have either agreed, which is true. Frankly, there's no evidence to excuse the war crimes Israel have been conducting. They're targeting hospitals especially. Their lies over a Hamas tunnel in the grounds of one blown wide open the other day by an Al Jazeera investigation, a body Morgan could learn a thing or two from about actual journalism. An international criminal court case seems to be building itself up quite nicely. Alternatively, Corbyn could come back with saying yes to Hamas being a terrorist group and coming back on Morgan by asking, does international law allow the occupied to resist occupation by any means? Which is also true, though I don't condone the means Hamas took, obviously. Of course, either of those responses predicates being able to get a word in edgeways, as Morgan is practically on his desk, jumping up and down like some kind of red-faced gammon-themed yo-yo, braying, is Hamas a terrorist group? Do you think Israel can do peace with Hamas? And every other pro-Israeli point he chose to push and make on his show. Here's the thing though, Piers. However the world has designated Hamas, they are the government of Gaza. Are they a good government? A popular government? No, they are not. That is why they have been in power for 17 years, because it has been 17 years since Hamas last allowed an election to happen in Gaza. There have been no elections there since 2006. Hamas at that time portrayed themselves as seeking peace, to now saying they'll repeat the events of October the 7th again and again and again. That in itself seems to bear out Morgan's point, but it doesn't make Corbyn wrong either, because you still have to talk to both sides, both governments, both sets of leaders, to bring about a ceasefire. Negotiation always has to happen, and it begins with a ceasefire and hopefully then becomes something more permanent. Of course, Morgan is delighted with himself and couldn't resist a smarmy tweet about all of this afterwards. He said, "I repeatedly asked Jeremy Corbyn if he thought Hamas was a terrorist group and whether they should stay in power in Gaza. He repeatedly refused to answer either question. Staggering." Well, you repeatedly wouldn't let him answer. You repeatedly refused to let him contextualise his response in terms of the requirement of a ceasefire, which is the point he was trying to make and is the position he's been committed to for years. Hamas is a terrorist group. It committed an act of terrorism on October the 7th and many before, since it came into existence in 1987. For context, the Nakba was in 1948 and the occupation and land grab of the Six-Day War took place in 1967, with more happening bit by bit ever since. Israel have been an oppressor and they've been committing acts of terrorism and violations of international law, I would argue, for a lot longer than Hamas have. Not that that excuses any such actions at all. But for all of Hamas's atrocities, they are still the government in Gaza. Should they be in government? Probably not. I think they'd be voted out if they held an election, which is why they won't hold one. They'd hardly be the first government behaving like that, though, would they? It's unfortunate, I would suggest, that both Hamas and Netanyahu have been in government quite as long as they both have, as far as a peaceful, permanent resolution goes. Both are unpopular governments. Both face protests from their own people. Neither speak for the majority of their citizens, Gazan or Israeli alike. Would Morgan put someone pro-Israeli under just as much of a hammering as he did Corbyn? I doubt it, because it wouldn't suit the "do you condemn Hamas" narrative, would it? Our media insist on carrying as if it is the whole story rather than just half of it. Hamas are opposed to the apartheid going on in Israel, and it reminds me that the ANC in South Africa, also opposed to apartheid there, once upon a time, back in the 1980s, were once labelled terrorists too, that Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist and locked up for it. Real terrorists like General Pinochet, though, well, they were welcomed as friends by the likes of Margaret Thatcher at that time, weren't they? We know different now, though. And in future we may look back on what is happening here and now very differently from the narratives that are being set, especially narratives being set by the likes of Piers Morgan. The responses to Morgan's self-adulating tweet bear out that people saw right through him, though. Ashok Kumar on Twitter said, "What's staggering about it? Israel is getting rid of Hamas to justify this genocide. What are the alternatives? A Gaza government by the fascist occupiers? A Gaza governed by fascist occupiers bootlickers, the Palestinian Authority? Corbyn's a serious person who doesn't act on soundbite impulses." Socialist Voice account said mainstream journalists are still obsessing over Jeremy Corbyn while Gaza burns. Staggering. Journalist Robert Carter of 5 Pillars News, the only independent Muslim news site going in the West, said, "Almost as staggering as you repeatedly refusing to answer whether you condemn Israel or the IDF. It's best not to throw stones in a glass house, Piers." So how about it then, Piers? Thanks for answering that question. Seems only fair when you railroaded someone else to say the opposite, blocking them from finishing a sentence because they refused to just say yes or no without the necessary added context. Because this isn't that simple a problem to fix. It wouldn't still be going on after 75 years if it was. So instead of trying to get a gotcha and inviting guests on just so you can talk over the top of them, try using those things on the side of your head once in a while and listen. Because you don't do nearly enough of that. And in my opinion, anyone watching your show believing they're being informed are being let down without perhaps realising it. Big up JC, you're still triggering the right people. You're still leading the opposition in practice, if not in name. And it's a sad state of affairs when it is opposition such that he is showing to our nominally political leaders that is to call for peace and a ceasefire right now. Thanks for watching. I hope you found that video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on the story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Piers Morgan very much doesn't like being on the back foot himself, as he found himself to be recently when he went up against Carla Denyer of the Green Party. not on his own show as it turned out, so unable to railroad her in quite the same way, but he did try it on still. Yet equally his arguments were no match for hers anyway, also calling for a ceasefire as the Green Party is. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so tonight is the night as the King's Speech is set to be voted on to be ratified. It was a measly offering by the Tories, but all the talk is in relation to the amendments to that King's Speech that have been set out in relation to the UK's position on calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, as Israel continue to rain fire down on civilians, hoping they'll hit the odd Hamas operative as they do, but oops, oh dear, never mind, being their attitude if they don't. All in the name of self-defence, of course, whilst they're doing it. There are, at time of writing, 3 amendments being set out, whilst 2, that of the SNP and Labour lefty Zara Sultana, call for a ceasefire. Starmer's Labour has tabled one that absolutely does not, flat refusing to back the SNP amendment because that would undermine Labour's position in Scotland, apparently. So, weaponising the Scottish vote, because for some reason Starmer thinks that if they back a ceasefire, it'll be encouraging votes for the SNP, whilst also assuming calling for more killing is somehow appealing to the average Scot, I presume, which I'm sure it isn't. They can't use that excuse not to back Zara Sultana's amendment, though, in many ways copying the SNP's one, but being put forward by a Labour MP, of course, other Labour MPs could put their name to that and not suffer the pathetic accusation from Starmer's lot that they are undermining their own party by supporting another. Party before the greater good, very much Starmer's position, and his own amendment bears that out, pathetic as it is. He is resolutely on the side of Israel, as the Tory government is. The amendments, sadly, I feel, are doomed to fail. But knowing who voted in what way here and now, who stands by the people of Gaza on a vote when it matters, is invaluable information for all voters. Because anyone voting for the killing to continue is not somebody any of us should be voting for, surely. And really that should transcend all political divides. Right, so today is the King's Speech ratification vote, normally just a formality to get government going again, laying out the plans for the next year, the last year leading up to a general election almost certainly. So the conduct of all MPs is something more and more of us should be scrutinising. Nothing will expose their mentalities more than whether or not to vote for a ceasefire and the 3 amendments proposed for the King's Speech concerning our national position regarding a ceasefire in Gaza, though. And will spell out who is in favour of stopping ambulances getting blown up, babies in special care dying because the oxygen they need gets cut off, attacks on hospitals and churches and mosques and all manner of civilian infrastructure, on evacuation convoys, on refugee camps, and even in the south where Israel literally told northern Gazans to go. A vote against such blatant and egregious conduct should be a no-brainer, but unfortunately we have far too many politicians, notably our main party leaders, utterly in the thrall of Israel, completely on their side, and absolutely not on the side of the opinion of the majority of the British public, 3/4 of whom want a ceasefire. It is of no surprise the Tories are backing their unamended King's Speech. They're in government. They left talk of a ceasefire out, even though there are Tory MPs unhappy with that position. Perhaps unhappy enough to back a ceasefire amendment? Who knows? Certainly, some Tories signed Labour MP Richard Bergen's early day motion calling for one, but how they actually vote is what actually matters. We have a ceasefire amendment laid down by the SNP, which I covered in another video, along with Starmer's warning his MPs not to back that by weaponising their electoral chances in Scotland to put them off. As I've said already, though, I think this issue transcends party lines. I expect Labour MPs to still back that amendment and also back Zara Sultana's very similar amendment, which gets around that Scotland issue that Starmer and co have dreamt up. Insult to the Scottish that has been. Now, Starmer has taken a very hardline stance on this issue, which, as we know, which is why this vote tonight almost puts him under more scrutiny than Sunak now. But that is also his own fault. He's been saying all week that his MPs were being whipped to vote against ceasefire amendments and that any of his front bench team who vote for a ceasefire will be sacked for it. That's sick. But he also underestimated the dissent in his own ranks over that he may have no compunction in seeing the killing continue instead of working to see it stop, but a lot of other MPs didn't go into politics to be quite that depraved. As such, Starmer has blinked a little. He's put forward his own amendment, still not calling for a ceasefire, still putting all the emphasis on Joe Biden's US foreign policy of humanitarian pauses, at least until Biden changes and calls for a ceasefire, and then Starmer will immediately do the same as well. You do know it's Brits and not Americans that vote for you, right, Keith? Anyway, he's now whipping at Labour MPs not to vote against ceasefire motions, but to abstain instead. Now, Sir Abstain's a lot is back, folks. However, it remains his commitment to sack any shadow ministers and their juniors if they choose to vote for a ceasefire. Here's what his motion says. At the end, add, and submit to your majesty that this House wishes to see an end to the violence in Israel and Palestine, unequivocally condemns the horrific terrorist attack and murder of civilians by Hamas, calls for the immediate release of all hostages, and reaffirms Israel's right to defend its citizens from terrorism. Believes all human life is equal and that there has been too much suffering, including far too many deaths of innocent civilians and children over the past month in Gaza. Reaffirms the UK's commitment to the rules-based international order, international humanitarian law, and the jurisdiction of the ICC to address the conduct of all parties in Gaza and Hamas's attacks in Israel. Calls on Israel to protect hospitals and lift the siege conditions, allowing food, water, electricity, medicine and fuel into Gaza. Requests the government continue to work with the international community to prevent a wider escalation of the conflict in the region. Guarantee that people in Gaza who are forced to flee during this conflict can return to their homes and seek an end to the expansion of illegal settlements and settler violence in the West Bank. And whilst acknowledging the daily humanitarian pauses to allow in aid and the movement of civilians, believe they must be longer to deliver humanitarian assistance on a scale that begins to meet the desperate needs of the people of Gaza, which is a necessary step to an enduring cessation of fighting as soon as possible and a credible diplomatic and political process to deliver the lasting peace of a two-state solution. It is utterly pathetic for numerous reasons, and little wonder that in the run-up to this vote today, councillors are resigning once again over Starmer's stance. Notably again, one in Oxford, where Labour have already lost their majority there and are hanging on to power there as a minority outfit already, having lost another councillor, they're another step closer to losing control entirely. And I can imagine after Starmer inevitably backs his own amendment for those humanitarian pauses again, just longer ones, more will go, as he'll have rubber stamped his position with a vote that needs to haunt him forever. Let's shred this amendment though, because it really is shit. Wishes to see an end to the violence but won't actually vote for that. Condemns the attacks by Hamas but not Israel. Calls for the release of the hostages, yes, let's not forget all the ones Israel's holding from the West Bank though, which have nothing to do with Hamas. Believes all lives are equal and there's been too much suffering despite not criticising Israel and not voting to end the suffering. Reaffirms the UK commitment to international law when Israel has been an occupying force for decades in violation of international law, and under international law Palestine has a right to defend itself and oppose the occupation however it can. Obviously I don't condone the violence though. I'll come back to international law in my next video though, as Starmer and Co really do not know what they're talking about on this, and their ignorance has just been exposed on that, undermining this amendment too, because it's written out of sheer bloody ignorance. Let the people of Gaza return to their homes is a particularly twisted thing to say as well, so they can get bombed out again. How many even still have a home? Because if you think Israel haven't been targeting homes, you'll be appalled to hear that half of Gazan homes in the north of Gaza no longer exist. End settler expansion and violence in the West Bank. Yes, one bit I do agree with. But the amendment only does so on the predication that humanitarian pauses are allowed, which is just the most pathetic thing because we need a ceasefire. Let the aid in as long as we can bomb it after. That's the message. It's the equivalent of wetting a victim's lips before you resume the torture. I was minded to think of Christ on the cross when I read that analogy. It's a very good one, not one of mine. My level of thinking was that I thought of the Disney film Robin Hood at that point. That's the level I work at. My favourite animated classic as it happens, because a humanitarian pause was committed by the Honourable Sheriff of Nottingham when he stopped to let the little rabbit open his birthday present, if you remember, those of you who have seen it. And then the persecution resumed when he took away the coin, the rotter. But in all seriousness, this is what is going on a much more bloody scale. Not gifts at stake, but lives. As things stand, it's being reported that of the 17 frontbenchers who were thought to be preparing to vote for a ceasefire, who had signed Richard Bergen's original EDM, Starmer's amendment has, it seems at time of writing, reduced that to somewhere between 6 and 10, depending on your source. Nearly a dozen placated by the ability, at worst case, to sit on their hands instead of backing their previous actions when they signed that EDM. A great pity if their principles are so easily bought off. It won't be acceptable to people checking the voting record afterwards to see how their MP voted on this. Starmer, when running to be Labour leader, stood on a pledge to promote peace and human rights. Tonight, he's going to sack any front bencher who votes to stop the killing. That's what his pro-Israel backers bought by getting him into the top job. Anyone who voted for him, believing him to be something else, has been conned. Those backers will be delighted. We need to wipe the smiles from their faces because this guy isn't fit to be an MP, let alone be next in line to be the Prime Minister, and neither is any other MP who votes against a ceasefire tonight. Do we really want to be represented by so many people who are set on seeing killing on this scale continue? Really, I mean, come on, ask yourselves. Zach Polanski of the Green Party made an excellent comment on this. He said, "In the Green Party, we have been calling for a ceasefire consistently. I was expecting Labour would join us eventually in doing the right thing. Grim to see them dig harder in the opposite direction towards supporting warmongers. Absolutely shameless." Yes, it is. Shameless. Thank goodness there are alternatives like the Greens that we can vote for if we do not accept this. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say in this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer chose to weaponise Scotland on this issue, as I alluded to in this video, and you can get all the details of that here, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer's Labour have made a lot of humanitarian pauses being the way forward. A charge led by US foreign policy, not one of Starmer's own. It's a case of Joe Biden says jump and Starmer says how high. But last month, a group of lawyers led by Michelle Farrell, a professor of law at Liverpool University, wrote to Starmer and co asking for clarification on Labour's position on collective punishment, forcible transfer and war crimes. Basically, if they're going to be so ardently pro-Israel and excusing what that country is doing, the mounting evidence on all of these aspects of international law being broken as they are, how is Labour justifying it? How is Labour upholding international law as it says it does, as its amendment to the King's Speech says it does, and says it is committed to in light of what Israel is doing? Well, we've had a response, and various aspects of that response from Team Keith have left the lawyers with feelings of profound concern. Right, so an array of legal experts have written to Keir Starmer, to Labour, wanting to know what legal justification they have for supporting Israel in the manner they do, if they are also apparently upholding international law as they do so. Because we've seen numerous instances of collective punishment. Indeed, Starmer himself said Israel had a right to do that, didn't he? Cutting off the water and the power to Gaza before denying he ever said it, and has never apologised for it. That'd be beneath him, such is his arrogance. Israel have forced the evacuation of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, demanding people move south, and those who couldn't have been targeted by the IDF. That forcible transfer, also a violation of international law. Indeed, the targeting thereafter of refugee camps, hospitals, schools, all protected under international law, has happened as well. We've seen the footage. The list of war crimes being committed by Israel in Gaza is growing, and all Starmer can ever say is that Israel has a right to defend itself. But this isn't self-defence. This is aggression and violation of the laws in place to protect such institutions. And if you aren't calling that out, if you aren't acting to bring that to an end, then you're complicit too, and you're part of the problem. And how the voting goes in the King's Speech and on those amendments will tell us who is choosing to be complicit and who is actually prepared to stand up and uphold international law. Because one person who surely won't be doing that is the former human rights lawyer Keir Starmer himself, who has put to bed any notion now surely of being on the side of human rights here, and certainly will have after he votes down any amendment that calls for a ceasefire tonight. The response Labour gave to Michelle Farrell and the other assorted lawyers involved, quite a number of them who have signed this statement they have issued in response to what Labour told them. The response they received of profound concern to them. The statement reads, "Dear Sir Keir Starmer, we the undersigned wrote to you on the 17th and 25th of October calling on you to clarify Labour's position on collective punishment and forcible transfer and to oppose and condemn the commission of war crimes. Our letter was prompted by numerous statements from you and senior members of your shadow cabinet, which appeared to suggest that Labour either did not understand the international law governing Israel's conduct or was unwilling, for political reasons, to publicly support fundamental principles of international law. On the 10th of November, we received a response from the Labour Party. Various aspects of the response are of profound concern. Most worrying in Labour's response to our letters was the lack of understanding of international law. The response states that collective punishment under international law is considered a war crime as per Article 33 of the Geneva Conventions 1949, to which Britain is a signatory. This is inaccurate. The collective punishment of civilians is prohibited under Article 33 of the 4th Geneva Convention and under Article 75 Part 2D, Additional Protocol 1. States are unequivocally bound by the prohibition of collective punishment. Any form of collective punishment amounts to an internationally wrongful act. And as we pointed out in both letters, the imposition of collective punishment is likely to be considered a war crime under customary international law. Also, as it stands, it is the United Kingdom and not Britain that approves international treaties. This may seem like a technicality, but in the midst of an international crisis of this scale, and given Israel's statements, it is imperative that the Labour Party understands international law and understands the gravity of its position on collective punishment and on forcible transfer. As regards collective punishment, Israeli officials made their intentions clear. The Minister of Defense, Yoav Gallant, announced a complete siege of Gaza, said there will be no electricity, no food, no fuel, everything is closed. We are fighting human animals and we are acting accordingly. A spokesperson for the Israeli military said that the emphasis was on damage and not accuracy, and another official stated that creating a severe humanitarian crisis in Gaza is a necessary means to achieve the goal. The Minister for Energy stated there will be no electricity, water or fuel until the Israeli abductees are returned home. You are, we are sure, well aware of the humanitarian crisis that Israel has since imposed through the siege of Gaza. The International Committee of the Red Cross, amongst others, have described both the complete siege of Gaza and the evacuation order as incompatible with international law. It is worth noting that 2 joint letters from over 40 UK academics with expertise in international law merits a formal response from the Labour Party. Why then was the response not checked for legal accuracy, and why was such fundamental legal issue given such cursory treatment? The role of the opposition, the response to our letters also states that Labour's position must be in line with Britain's global allies, namely the United States of America and the European Union. In this regard, it behooves us to remind you that it is the job of His Majesty's opposition to hold the government of the United Kingdom to account, not to follow policy lines of foreign governments. The legal obligations of the UK government should not be in doubt. Common Article 1 of the 4 Geneva Conventions requires state parties to respect and to ensure respect for the conventions. We would also like to remind you that the United Kingdom has ratified the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. As confirmed by the International Council of Justice in 2020, all states have an obligation to prevent acts of genocide, irrespective of where they occur. In light of the mounting and compelling evidence of genocide, as affirmed by UN experts and scholars of genocide, the United Kingdom can adhere to its obligations under the Genocide Convention by calling for an immediate ceasefire, an end to the siege, and an end to the forced displacement of Palestinians. In your closing paragraph, your colleague thanks us for the chance for the Labour Party to reiterate its commitment to international law. However, this meagre and inaccurate response to our specific questions seems to reflect Labour's lack of commitment to international law. The authority of international law, and the international humanitarian law in particular, is fundamentally undermined when its invocation amounts to no more than a political soundbite. If the Labour Party is serious about the potential of international law to settle international disputes and to reduce suffering and armed conflict, it must aspire to invoke its terms accurately and responsibly in order to encourage compliance. We therefore ask what legal advice the Labour Party has sought on the international legal framework governing Israel's conduct in the aftermath of the Hamas atrocities of the 7th of October, which, in addition to prima facie violations of international humanitarian law in Gaza, including war crimes, has included apparent war crimes in the West Bank, where Hamas does not exercise any control. We also write to urge you to ensure that all Labour MPs are fully informed of the UK government's legal obligation to call for a ceasefire in advance of any parliamentary vote. We look forward to your response to this letter. Now, I appreciate that was lengthy. I hope you stayed with me for it, because every bit of that was damning, and actually a lot of it can be aimed at the Tories too. Short of calling for a ceasefire at the end of the day, the government and the opposition, by following the foreign policy of Joe Biden, are themselves not upholding international law and not upholding treaties they're signatories of. All they do is talk about it because it sounds good. They don't actually uphold any of it. In fact, from Labour's perspective, they don't even seem to understand it, not having sufficient enough grip on the Geneva Conventions, of all things, that should be amongst the most basic and first aspects of law that any minister, especially one involved in foreign policy, should be involved with. To quote the right aspects of it, they couldn't do it, or even acknowledge the amendments made to it since the original conventions were originally ratified back in 1948-49. Their response to Labour has listed multiple examples of where international law is not being upheld by Israel, yet neither the government nor the Labour opposition are calling that out. In fact, added to that is the inference by reference to a meagre or inaccurate response. They not only don't appear to understand it, but also don't seem to care either. It's also worth mentioning that Emily Thornberry, also a lawyer, was copied into this response to Labour, so it's not just a shot across Starmer's bows as an apparent human rights lawyer, clearly not in possession of anything like the aptitude for the law his past over-promotion would have you believe otherwise, but similarly Thornberry gets called out too. And after going on TV and backing Starmer's narrative to the hilt, she's tarred herself with the same brush. Labour have been invited to reply to this. Whether they do or not remains to be seen, but I'll be very interested to see what they have to say if they do. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer's recent speech at Chatham House exposed more of his ceasefire ignorance and stupidity. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Keir Starmer's loyal anti-ceasefire voters did his bidding last night whilst insulting our intelligence afterwards to excuse their actions. They aren't worthy of being called Labour MPs after this, I don't think. They're Starmer MPs. Like him, they'll vote according to which way the wind is blowing and in their own self-interest. Last night, calls for a ceasefire failed as Parliament overwhelmingly rejected the SNP motion calling for Parliament to back one, rather than humanitarian pauses, rather than being overtly on the side of Israel to continue to do what they are doing in Gaza and stand by the people of Palestine. Our representatives suck. The Tories we knew would back Israel. There's no surprises there. Not a single one backed the SNP amendment. But where Keir Starmer instead faced significant rebellion, he watered down his own hardline stance to vote against the SNP by instead whipping his MPs to abstain on support for a ceasefire, hoping that this would mitigate the damage. Well, 56 Labour MPs, the only ones worthy of the name going forwards, defied him, and he suffered 10 resignations, some seemingly quite surprising. That's 28% of his MPs that rebelled, though, so that is really quite damaging for a guy wanting to become Prime Minister, that he has rebels on that scale when he chooses to be more rancid than average. Totally self-inflicted as it is, though. But amongst the very worst were some Starmer MPs who said they would back a ceasefire and ended up not doing so. And there's a story behind that, apparently. There's a lot more to these results than just the fact the call for a ceasefire fell. Right, so last night the Tories united behind the position to keep on letting Israel bomb the living daylights out of Gaza instead of taking a stand for peace, and to hold the rogue apartheid state to account, and to the standards of international law for once in its existence. Because if Russia can be held to account for bombing Ukraine, then Israel should be as well for what it is doing to Gaza. There are no double standards in the law. There very much is in how our parliamentarians are choosing to follow it, despite what they say. Political sound bites without any real intent behind them. Israel has a right to defend itself, they say, as they apparently had no idea about the October 7th attack. A lie. Egypt had tipped them off. Yet they still know each and every civilian building and public infrastructure that Hamas are allegedly using as a base of operations in order to destroy churches, refugee camps, hospitals, and more. If that hasn't made you do a double take by now, I suggest you do some brain training. But of course the story of the ceasefire and the will they or won't they attitude to backing the SNP amendment to call for one ended up centred around Labour, because Keir Starmer's ardent, unquestioning and eternally loyal support for the State of Israel meant he'd split his own party on an issue that really should have been a no-brainer. The Tories are a rancid bunch. Of course they'll back Israel here, but Labour are supposed to be better than that, aren't they? Sadly, of course, we know they aren't, with Sir Kid Starmer still leading. He'd started out by threatening sackings if his front bench chose to support the SNP motion for a ceasefire. 18 of them had previously signed an early day motion supporting this, and when it became crystal, even to the brill-creamed one, that they were not going to back down over this, having already suffered one resignation by this point, he watered it down to an abstention. He was resolute that the SNP motion shouldn't be supported, though. It'll undermine us in Scotland, was his excuse. We're beating the SNP. Look at Rutherglen and Hamilton West. We're set to take seats off them, according to the polls. Now is not the time to tell Israel to stop killing innocent Gazans. That would be divisive to our electoral chances. That is the crux of the excuse. But let's make one thing abundantly clear. Starmer owes everything to pro-Israel interests. He's not going to do anything that threatens their ongoing support. Some of these would be frontbench rebels, though. Well, Starmer apparently had a plan with some of these to placate them, as far as their constituents go, publicly, by allowing them in the debate to extol their support for a ceasefire, to speak well in front of those cameras, to provide the clips and sound bites for the media, and that social media would pick up. As long as when it came to the vote, they still abstained. And a prime example of this was Helen Hayes, the Shadow Minister for Children and Early Years. Particularly perverse, I thought, given how many children have died in Gaza now. Over 4,100 of them so far killed. Hayes stood up in Parliament and said she supported a ceasefire in order to stop an unfolding genocide, and so vocal was she that it was for several hours after the vote that people thought she had indeed voted for the SNP amendment and sacrificed her job in the process. A speech such that media people who were tracking would-be frontbench rebels counted her as a dead cert. As it turned out, she abstained. She put her job first when it came down to it, but not before doing a stellar turn for the cameras aimed at her constituents, obviously, because there's no other explanation for what she did. So they too will believe, or some of them will still believe, she backed the ceasefire when she actually didn't. It's pretty sick, but she wasn't the only disappointment on that score. Kim Ledbetter, the sister of murdered MP Joe Cox, was one rumoured to be voting for the ceasefire as well. She was saying as much. But in the end, just before the vote, she put out a video clip saying she wouldn't be backing it because she couldn't see the point of doing something that wouldn't make any difference. Sure, we don't have direct control over Israel, but we do have significant influence on the global stage. They get their missiles from the UK after all, but equally by Ledbetter's logic, it was pointless to back Starmer's extended humanitarian pauses as well then. Same point she made about a ceasefire stands there. So she did what she did for self-serving interests too. One other figure who abstained that is worth a mention is Nav Mishra, because he's in the Socialist Campaign Group of Labour MPs. He's supposed to be a solid lefty. What he actually is solidly loyal to Angela Rayner, who abstained. But this is worth mentioning because it exposes the problem with people putting so much faith in the SCG. They aren't all in it for altruistic reasons. They aren't all on the same page. They aren't all even proper lefties. And for this, Mishra should be booted out of the SCG. But they aren't known for flexing much muscle, are they? They're more into strongly worded letters. Of course, 56 Labour MPs did in the end back the SNP motion, which is a not insignificant rebellion against Starmer's appalling pro-Israel position. 10 frontbenchers resigned of the 17 that signed that ceasefire early day motion. Those who showed some principle, those who put their pet names to paper and followed it up with a vote. Or gave the appearance of it anyway. Paula Barker, Naz Shah, Afzal Khan, Yasmin Qureshi, Mary Kelly Foy, Rachel Hopkins, Sarah Owen, Dan Carden, Andy Slaughter and Jess Phillips. For those shocked at Phillips being on this list, she has a huge Muslim population in her constituency, and you can't hold a frontbench position if you no longer hold your own seat. She was looking after her own backside here, make no mistake about that. The 7 who could sign the EDM but couldn't bring themselves to actually vote for something they put their name to were Kim Ledbetter, Matt Western, Nav Mishra, Rushanara Ali, Seema Malhotra, Taiwo Otawemi, Tan Daisy and Helen Hayes. They owe serious answers to their constituents over how they in particular have acted since the latest atrocities began and how they can justify flip-flopping as they have, because if you're going to play that it would have been divisive card, then you aren't thinking of the innocent victims here at all, just your own ambitions and a potential future Labour government. It insults our intelligence to say that line. It is grubby. It is dishonest. And people angry at this result, angry that we aren't being properly represented, largely thanks to an electoral system that ignores most of our votes, aren't going to forget it. The humanitarian pause is stupid. Goodness knows I've both slammed it and poked fun out of it in recent videos. But it is also an idea that has been rejected by numerous global peace organisations and humanitarian agencies, from UNICEF to the World Health Organization, the World Food Programme, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, and more. The list is growing. Stopping things for a few hours just to get aid in before that aid can then be targeted itself is just stupid and solves nothing when the fighting and the killing just carries on. If you can sleep at night having voted for that and thinking that'll do, you're twisted. Labour MPs under Keir Starmer, along with all the Tories who voted against the ceasefire, including the Northern Irish ones and the DUP, 4 of those shameless Burks opposed to ceasefire too, are stains on humanity. Those who abstained are no better, too cowardly to stand up and be counted. Literally. Labour MPs can make as many excuses as they like, but it is how you vote that counts. This is one vote that none of us should ever forget, and how MPs chose to act needs to be remembered come the time for us, all of us, to vote again for them. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Starmer recently sacked a Jewish staffer over his pro-Palestinian stance, showing it has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, nothing actually to do with Judaism, and everything to do with acquiescing to Israel where Starmer is concerned. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so, as expected, the Supreme Court ruled Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman's Rwanda deportation scheme unlawful. This should have been the end of the story. That's it. We should all be cheering. Hooray! That's the end of that. Victory for the asylum seekers and those supporting them not being kicked around like political footballs. Unfortunately, this £140 million fascist waste of time and money is going to tick on, despite the sacking of Braverman. Our mandateless and completely unelected Prime Minister once more seemingly set on doing whatever he damn well pleases, now threatening to change the law so as to make Rwanda a safe country when it isn't. If you legislate that it is, it still won't be. You're just abusing the law and your position to make a really rubbish law, a lie, frankly, into a legality. It's only be legal here, though, and human rights laws are international. So how far is Sunak willing to take this idiocy? Because he can't stand the thought of being beaten and put in his place by the same laws of the land the rest of us have to abide by. Because his speech following the ruling was utterly unhinged. Right, so Rishi Sunak had a bit of a paddy in front of the cameras yesterday as the Supreme Court dumped his government's Rwanda plans once and for all, or at least that's how it seemed at the time. Surely there's nowhere for him to go from here with it. Sadly not the case, it would appear, though going anywhere sensible with it is a completely different matter. Of course, it was definitely the dumping of the legacy of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman after her, both involved in this fascist, unworkable, overly expensive stuff designed to appease to a far-right fringe who have become increasingly and worryingly dominant in our political discourse. Would Braverman have survived as Home Secretary after this ruling? She'd staked her career on it pretty much. She was dreaming about those deportations, and now her vision of planes taking off a runway over and over again, no doubt her version of counting sheep to go to sleep, have crashed and burned on the runway. We'll never know if she would have actually resigned, of course, but the result wasn't unexpected, so perhaps Sunak figured sacking her a couple of days early would show some strength on his part. If that was his thinking, he clearly didn't expect a letter from her following her departure, which flayed him 6 ways from Sunday. There have been resignation letters, and then there was this. If you haven't read it, Sunak got burnt so bad he won't sit down for a week. But equally, it's just as funny for how Braverman clearly thought she was untouchable. Less funny, though, is what Sunak is planning from here onwards, though, because he's not quitting on these deportations, and he can't really afford to politically when, having got rid of Braverman, finally having no choice after her attacks on the police, he still needs her faction backing him. And if he can't afford to have her in cabinet any longer, then he's going to have to continue with the policies they favour instead. Despite saying he respected the Supreme Court's decision, he blatantly doesn't, as he seeks to circumvent it. Despite the Supreme Court ruling Rwanda is unsafe, Sunak says it is. His respect for the Supreme Court ignores their findings that Rwanda has a poor human rights record, where refugees have been gunned down in the street, have been persecuted for being gay, and where the evidence presented to the Supreme Court showed there to be a substantial risk to asylum seekers of being returned to their home country, in spite of our obligations to them still, their application of asylum having still been made in the UK, something that is against international law and is called refoulement. Now, this is a particular concern for Muslim groups and people fleeing areas of conflict like Afghanistan, Syria or Yemen. And there's also the small matter of conflict happening on two of Rwanda's borders, as I've spoken about in previous videos, something that didn't come up in the court case, however, with the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Burundi, historic ongoing issues of which Rwanda has often been the instigator at that. But no, forget about all of that. Rishi Sunak has decided Rwanda is safe. Not because it really is, but because he needs to keep those who couldn't give a damn about human rights and asylum seekers on the batshit flank of his own party appeased. And so emergency legislation is coming down the road to make sure we say Rwanda is safe, thus getting around the Supreme Court's ruling. All of this is for naught, though, when you come to the matter of human rights, which is what the issue of safety is predicated upon. Refoulement is a blatant disregard of the right to claim asylum, and it is also a human rights violation to protected characteristics to send people to Rwanda where they will be abused because of those characteristics. The Court of Human Rights rules on that, so for as long as we're signatories of the Human Rights Convention, there's no legs in this. And to be honest, we're probably going to see a change of government before things escalate that far. It really does depend how fast Sunak chooses to act on this. Of course, Starmer's rancid party, what used to be the Labour Party, but is now just the corpse of what it once was, will bin it anyway. Starmer has said he'll scrap it, though sadly not on the grounds of human rights, as a normal person might react firstly to, a human rights lawyer might react to first and foremost at that. Because for Starmer, the issue comes down to cost. He doesn't see vulnerable people, he sees an expense. But let's suppose Sunak does move faster. He gets his law stating Rwanda is safe. He tries to get flights going and he gets blocked again by further legal action, this time on human rights grounds. What then? Well, Sunak has already lambasted anyone taking such matters to what he calls a foreign court. The European Court of Human Rights, foreign? Well, it's based abroad, sure, but it is there solely to uphold the Conventions on Human Rights, which lawyers in this country, the UK, had no small role in drawing up. Its name is something of a misnomer too, since it is an international court overseeing all countries who are signatories to it, including this one. It is very much a national court as well as an international one, and remains so, well, unless these Tories pull us out of the Human Rights Act, so stop stoking up opposition to it. It's a British court too. Making policies that have been ruled unlawful into lawful ones should in and of itself be a criminal act, you would think, because it is acting in political self-interest blatantly and not in line with what is good and what is right and what is just. It's fascism, isn't it? Because you're just legislating away anything you don't like, and that pretty much would make Sunak another stunted dictator, of which the world has seen enough of. It totally undermines democracy, which is built on the rule of law, if he can just change the law any time he wants to just suit himself and his own far-right fantasies. That he's completely unelected and installed in post just rounds out the stereotype autocratic despot image. The scheme is illegal. Our human rights are not Sunak's to bargain away. This will end very, very badly if it isn't opposed, because it isn't just the rights of asylum seekers they will scrap. It'll be all of our rights. And if you think life in Tory Britain after 13 years can't get worse, you will be very, very much mistaken. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where we didn't really need to wait for the Supreme Court to destroy Sunak's claims of Rwanda being safe, since we knew all about it when Braverman had her backside handed to her on this very issue back in August. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so we've seen many a resignation of Labour councillors up and down the country under the regime of Keir Starmer, but a good many of these were happening long before he reaffirmed his devotion to Israel, as his diktat and swerve to the right has driven more away. But more importantly than that, voters have left too, as by-election defeats at council level, certainly in areas Labour consider to be strongholds, should serve as a warning, because if you're losing at local level, that will inevitably knock on as activists and voters leave the party in search of better options, and the knock-on effect goes up higher and higher. We saw such an occurrence happen in Newham a few months ago as Mehmood Mirza, formerly of the Labour Party, a victim of a smear and spying campaign as documented in the excellent Al Jazeera documentaries, became the first independent elected to a council that is, with the exception of 2 Greens and a suspended Labour councillor currently sitting as an independent, solidly Labour. It was a pretty big deal. Since then, the cracks have continued to show as the independent group, calling themselves Newham Independents, a group that has formed because of Starmer and what he's done to Labour, are attempting a repeat of Mirza's win by taking another formerly Labour seat off the party, as another by-election worth watching takes place next week. Right, so Newham Borough Council, a Labour-run council, not without its issues with Starmer, however, as a recent letter from the mayor there sent to their leader spelling out their position that they wish to see a ceasefire shows the obvious concern and clear issues Labour councillors face in an area that is so ethnically and religiously diverse as Newham is. People are sickened by the National Party message and it's local councillors that get stripped out first. The by-election here actually having been triggered by Starmer's pro-Israel stance, since it is an example of a Labour councillor not just quitting the party over the anti-ceasefire positioning of the Labour Party that we've seen other councillors do up and down the country, but actually in this instance the councillor in question quit the council entirely. I mentioned this in another recent video, the departure of this chap called Daniel Lee Facco, the councillor for Pleistone North. Well, the Newham Independents are putting up their own candidate for this seat now, Sophia Nakvi, a former Labour member of 15 years standing who, like so many other Labour members, resigned over the Starmer ceasefire stance on Israel, still refusing to call one even as the death toll in Gaza hits 12,000 people. Now, the Newham Independents are an entity of Starmer's own making. They've essentially come into being since the election of Mahmoud Mirza, himself formerly Labour, of the Labour left, a group of former Corbyn supporters as they are, having to stand as independents because they are no longer welcome in the Labour Party, not prepared to sacrifice for what they believe in for the sake of power. Mirza was actually the victim of a Labour campaign against him to discredit him, all covered, as I said before, in the Al Jazeera Labour Files documentaries, which, if you've not seen them yet, you can still access on YouTube. They are essential watching if you really want to know what Labour is all about these days under Starmer. It is scandalous. Mirza left Labour when Starmer decided to suspend both Newham constituencies for blatantly factional reasons. The final straw for Mirza personally was that he had made it onto the ballot for the Labour National Executive Committee elections before finding himself spuriously suspended, thus barring him from getting elected. He went on to win that Newham Council seat, Boleyn Ward. Even more funny is the fact that the Labour candidate he ended up beating was no less than the head of events and visits for Keir Starmer himself, working out of the opposition leader's office. But now the plan is to get Sophia Nakvi elected as well, and she spoke to Islam TV the other day about why she left Labour, of course, and the situation in Gaza. But Keir Starmer, as a human rights lawyer, cannot represent her when he will not support a ceasefire, will not think of the people of Palestine, and is seemingly indifferent to the deaths of babies and the displacement of huge numbers of people. Somebody like that cannot represent someone like her, and so many of us feel just like she does, not just on this issue, but many others. We've left Labour because of what it has become and the messaging coming out from the Labour leadership now. Nakvi is also standing to do the work of a councillor, though. Obviously, it's a job after all. Not just a pro-ceasefire candidate, though, because Labour have had dominance in Newham for so long, about 100 years. Newham has been Labour roughly as long as Labour has been in existence. But they have become complacent in that time. Nationally, the Labour Party attitude on Islamophobia is rank, and as a Muslim herself, Sophia Nakvi feels let down on that issue too. But locally, the streets are filthy, parking is a massive problem, crime rates are rising, fly tipping is rife, council tax has gone up by 26% since 2018. The Labour-run council there scrapped visitor permits and the first car-free permit, and residential satisfaction with that council over the last 3 years has dropped by 48%. The cultural diversity of Newham plays a part here too, because the messaging from Starmer and co is opening the eyes to more and more people who have been lifelong Labour voters in Newham and now can't stand the thought of supporting them. Matters going beyond just an attitude of voting against the Tories, because they are seeing no difference in Labour. An actual disgust at those who will not oppose a genocide is something people are not prepared to vote for. Polling doesn't reflect anger on this scale, and if replicated sufficiently across the country, there can be some very embarrassed pollsters around yet again. By standing as an independent, though, Nakvi can speak out, can show her independence, stand for what she believes in, can show the solidarity she wants to, and speak freely about it without feeling she's got eyes on her from her own party with a view to suspend or expel her on whatever fiction the governance and legal unit these days can concoct, as we've seen happen to too many good and decent people. The issue of anti-Semitism used against them, but Islamophobia, in turn, gets ignored. That said, the situation in Gaza, the response to Nakvi's campaign has brought together people from across the religious divides, having people of all faiths in this ethno-multicultural area, including Jewish constituents supporting her, and her position in stark opposition to that of Labour, her former party. If you regard yourself as a humanitarian, the supporting Labour right now under this leader is impossible, surely. He talks of humanitarian pauses, but where's the humanitarianism in it when it's all about resuming the killing after a bit of food and water gets through? Stop the killing completely, and more food and water could get through for a start. Mahmoud Mirza proved that you don't need the money or the resources when you have a right and just cause behind you. And when you have people who want to be associated with doing the right thing, who will give their free time and effort to help deliver that. And so many of the people that Labour have driven away are the most politically active ones, the ones that will go out in the pouring rain, in the wind, delivering leaflets and having conversations on doorsteps. Labour has lost those. And that's why it lost before in Newham, and that is why it can quite easily lose again next Thursday. At the end of the day, this is ordinary people living ordinary lives, wanting to clean up their area that they as residents live in, and also to stand for a worthwhile cause as we witness such atrocity in the Middle East on a daily basis, as this genocide is allowed to continue with the support of those who would rule over us given the chance. This is one of those community-led grassroots campaigns taking on a big beast party that isn't doing what it should be, and nationally is carrying a message that is rancid and contemptible. Newham is sick of Labour and sick of Starmer, and adding another independent voice, a voice of what Labour once was and what it should be and what it is supposed to be at that. Real Labour voters with real Labour values should be backing the real Labour Party around here, and that means a vote for not Labour, but for Sophia Nakvi on November the 23rd. So if you've got a vote in Plaistow North, get out and use it. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Do have your say on the video in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Mahmoud Mirza won back in July, and the atmosphere that was permeating the Labour Party then too. Nothing's changed. Not least a Muslim member of the Labour Party NEC itself being blocked from being a parliamentary candidate in addition to that. Says an awful lot about its position regarding Islamophobia, doesn't it? And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Israel have come out with some of the dodgiest evidence going to justify their bombing of civilian infrastructure, haven't they? Refugee camps, churches, mosques, over 40% of homes are all bombed out, but a favoured target has been the sheer number of hospitals hit, all under the auspices that Hamas are using the buildings for nefarious ends. But they've been tunnelling under them, and they have to be bombed out, and any loss of services as a result to the people of Gaza, well, that's their fault for hiding Hamas. How dare they? But it is the excuses. Going into a hospital and pointing to paper on a pinboard alleging that it is a list of terrorist names, figuring nobody would zoom in and read it and reveal that it was in fact just a calendar with days and dates written on it. Justifying the targeting of a hospital because there is clearly a Hamas tunnel entrance there when building plans revealed it to be a water tank. Saying they are sending incubators into hospitals in Gaza when it isn't a lack of incubators that are seeing babies die, it is a lack of power to run them. Faking a video featuring an Israeli actress saying Hamas is not letting them leave, pretending to be a hospital staffer, when it was all staged. Video of them helping an elderly man to safety, showing the IDF's compassion, when the reality was they put 2 bullets in his back off camera. But the latest one, though, is so incredulous, I felt I had to cover this, because now Israel is basically saying that Hamas are capable of defying the laws of physics. Right, so this may be a story you've heard something about, but perhaps may not have, or may not have realised how really, really insane it actually is. And this is the story of Hamas stashing weaponry behind an MRI machine in Al-Shifa Hospital. Big metal stuff stashed around what is basically a giant magnet. There's a good idea. Now this tickled me because aside from being a politics mouthpiece, I am actually in possession of a degree in physics. And I saw this story and I couldn't help but laugh. Dark humour, gallows humour I suppose you would understand. But anyway, anyone who has been in for an MRI will know you've got to strip yourself of anything metal, anything magnetic before you go in, lest the machine do something unfortunate to you. If they can do this to an extremely heavy hospital bed, you can imagine what they can do if you, say, leave your piercings in, or a necklace on, or a stash of grenades and guns behind it. These machines are powerful enough to lift a car up. They are stupidly powerful electromagnets, MRI machines, that create a magnetic field around your body of anywhere from 1.5 to 7 Tesla in strength. The stronger the magnetic field, the better the image. Tesla being the unit of measurement for magnetic field strength, and was so long before Elon Musk's exploding cars of the same name came along. For reference though, if you've ever watched one of those YouTube videos of those magnets, little magnets on the desk that they put closer and closer together and then smash together, utterly merging and melding and destroying themselves because they're so powerful. Neodymium magnets, they're called. They come in at about 1 Tesla strength. So these machines are no joke. It's a great big donut they stick you into, not for the claustrophobic, exerting a powerful magnetic field which basically causes all the atoms of your body to line up so that a radio wave scanner can then produce an image of your internal doings. So now you know how they work. I've seen what they can do. They go wrong, we put something metal near it. You can imagine why I had a little bit of a laugh at the Israeli Defense Forces attempt at pretending this was a good place to stash anything made of steel, let alone weaponry and grenades. Now all of this has happened in the Al-Shifa hospital, which is the largest hospital in Gaza, and the IDF proudly stood with a big old stash of weapons they'd allegedly removed from the hospital to prove that Hamas were there, and everything they said about them hiding in amongst civilian populations and attacking hospitals and in public buildings was true and justified, and in no way did they plant any of it behind the MRI machine in Al-Shifa Hospital. Except I firmly believe that that is exactly what they have done. Al-Shifa Hospital lost power about a week ago. MRI machines, because they are complex, expensive, and they do a highly specialised job, it is also a complex, expensive and highly specialised job to set them up to begin with and get that monster of a magnet going. They never get turned off. In fact, it can cause significant damage to the machine to turn them off. A power cut, though, courtesy of Israel, with Keir Starmer's backing, of course, despite his denials since, well, that'll do it. Once the power is cut to an MRI machine, a safety feature will kick in, which is called quenching, which expels all of the liquid helium, which is also contained inside the MRI machine, which keeps the copper wiring of that electromagnet supercooled. So it works properly. It goes out into the atmosphere, vented away, otherwise that helium won't stay cool. And helium, as you know, tends to be a gas at normal temperatures, and the machine, well, it wouldn't like that liquid suddenly boiling into gas inside it, and nor would anybody who would be too close to it. No longer cool, though, with the helium gone, the magnetic field finally fails, though this can take several days. And the machine is unusable from that point, obviously. Now, quenching can cost thousands and thousands of pounds, A, to replace, and B, also damage the machine. So suffice to say, I don't think helium is getting into Gaza right now. I don't think these MRI machines are in any way, shape or form functional. They can't be with all that weaponry lying around them. Simple fact of the matter is, even if Hamas were stashing weaponry around that MRI machine, they cannot have been doing it while it was still in use. Given Gaza only has power for so many hours each day, I would imagine these MRI machines are heavily reliant on generators as a rule, since they must stay on, and as such would be very reliant on fuel, which is also being rationed and isn't getting into Gaza. I could also imagine that hospital will have prioritised their generators for life-saving equipment, life-preserving equipment, rather than what would be a very energy-thirsty device just used for imaging. In short, these weapons can only have been stashed there very recently, the machine clearly having lost power and been quenched for there to be no magnetic field there anymore, so that had to have taken place some days ago, I would think, to err on the safe side. There cannot possibly be any magnetic field present anymore. Would Hamas scuttle their own hospital equipment, however, just to stash weapons in that precise location? I don't buy that. That would be an epically stupid act of self-harm, wouldn't it? What an expensive waste of equipment just to find a hiding place. Would Israel stage it because they think we're all stupid? Well, yes, I think that's a lot more believable. There's plenty of other examples, but this one is less obvious enough to fool many, but not me, and I dare say not people who are familiar with these machines and indeed who work on them. And when you open this story up, just how stupid they think we are gets revealed. They weren't even finished yet, though. The BBC have reported on the findings of this stash, and although they missed the point about the MRI being an incredibly dangerous, probably the most stupid place you could try to hide metal weaponry, they noted that when one of their reporters viewed it, upon returning to the site of the stashed weapons later, they found even more weaponry had been added to it. The IDF excuse was this was more weaponry found from elsewhere. But surely if you were interested in building up a case against Hamas here, you'd separate your exhibits and not grow the one stash you're claiming to have found. The fact is, those weapons were never there whilst the machine was working. Al-Shifa had power a week ago. It may have had a generator powering the MRI machines there for a short time after. It could have taken several days thereafter for the magnetic field to finally fall, but the fact is, these machines are off and have quenched, and the magnetic field has dissipated for those weapons to be able to be sat there with no nasty bed-bending or explosive effects being had on them. Frankly, you'd need to have been born yesterday to believe they've not been planted, and honestly, it might have only been yesterday that it was safe for Israel to actually do it themselves. They've had Al-Shifa surrounded for the last 3 or 4 days. There is no way that can be a Hamas stash, because Hamas have not been there for at least the last 3 or 4 days. If they had been, Israelis would have killed them by now. You can condemn Hamas for a great many things, but they haven't done this. This is Israel once again fabricating evidence, and it's getting really silly now how much of this is getting exposed, and yet the Western world, especially the media, still treats what Israel tells us as gospel. Another example of this happening in this hospital was the matter of a laptop. This is a story that's gone around. I think it's been publicised a lot more because it was a lot more of an obvious thing to debunk. The claim being that this laptop belonged to Hamas, despite the keyboard having been in Hebrew, not Arabic, and the charger having an IDF electronic marker code written on it. So the propaganda is insane, and it's easily seen through, and it's called out. And we all need to be calling it out. We all need to be ridiculing it and ensuring all of this evidence is being highlighted so it can all be used later on to build a case against the Israeli state, because what they are doing is genocide. There are people who need to be put on trial for war crimes over this. But apart from all of that, it'll open more eyes to the truth, which is that nothing Israel says can be trusted. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Please do have your say on this story in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, there's a video recommendation where the hospital tunnel lies of Israel got shredded, not least by the engineers who helped build it. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so I've got a couple of videos lined up currently where people who have been enraged with their MP, perfectly justifiably, over abstaining on the ceasefire vote have got in touch with me about the responses they've got. So I might have a little bit of a mini-series if the videos do all right and are interesting enough for people to watch, and covering some of the excuses they've come out with since they voted how they voted, or didn't vote as the case may be, abstaining instead. Ill feeling has been expressed towards MPs since the vote, of course, notably Labour ones, of course, for whom better is expected of them. And my God, have they whinged about it since, some of them. The Green Party produced a graphic naming and shaming every MP who didn't back a ceasefire, yet despite all of that being public information, they've been accused of endangering MPs' well-being. Well, they didn't vote giving a toss about the well-being of innocent people in Gaza, half of whom are kids, when they chose to not vote to call for a ceasefire. So don't whinge when your voters choose to hold you to account. It's all publicly available information, after all. Now, I don't condone threats or violence, but protest outside an office, well, if you don't like it, try doing your job and serving the will of the people that elected you, and not your brill-creamed petty dictator of a leader whose claims to being a human rights lawyer have been well and truly binned by now. Some people have simply written to their MPs, of course, though, demanding an explanation, and this is something they can't hide from. A response is required, and one particular Labour frontbencher's excuses that I've been given are pretty damn weak. Right, so who is the frontbencher that wrote to their constituent then, Damo? Well, in this instance, it's Matt Western. If you haven't heard of him, he's the Shadow Minister for Higher Education, thing that you, or indeed many MPs, might not be aware of, and that is any reply they send to a constituent becomes the property of the constituent. Therefore, with their permission, they can be reproduced, and that is what I have in this case. It behooves MPs to be respectful in their responses then, and they aren't always, though I can't say that of Western. He was completely polite in his response, but that doesn't mean it was a good response, as he made his case for not backing a ceasefire. This is what he had to say when that question was put to him. Thank you for contacting me about the current crisis in Gaza. You will know that we had votes in Parliament last night. It's important to me that I share with you my considerations in coming to those decisions. Firstly, let me be absolutely clear here. I want a ceasefire, and I want it urgently. That is what I said 2 weeks ago when I broke with the Labour Party leadership and made my statement. I said we needed humanitarian pauses, more frequent and of longer duration, and to bring about a ceasefire. I will come to this shortly. Let me start, however, by reiterating my horror at the events we have seen in the Middle East in recent weeks. The scale of the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Gaza cannot and must not be ignored. There is insufficient food, water, energy, hospitals and schools. We are seeing humanitarian disaster, a colossal loss of life, a collapse of society and its economy and refugees seeking a home. These attacks on Gaza came as a response to the October 7th attack on Israel, an attack which itself was an unimaginable outrage, an act of evil terrorism perpetrated by Hamas on unarmed Israeli civilians celebrating Sukkot. I abhor the violence they inflicted on ordinary people that dreadful day. In response, we have witnessed relentless violence over the past month, following the 1,400 deaths in Israel on October 7th and the taking of over 200 hostages. There have been, according to the Gaza Health Ministry, over 11,000 people killed in Gaza, including over 4,600 children. The Israeli hostages remain captives of Hamas. Meanwhile, hundreds more Palestinian civilians are killed every day. We've also seen increased violence against Palestinians living in the West Bank. Despite the sense of utter despair felt by so many of us, brought by the absolute horrors we have witnessed, I tried to remain hopeful. Hopeful that through the collective mass of nations there can be a new will to secure peace through a truly viable two-state solution for Israel and Palestine. But first, those nations with influence must engineer a ceasefire. This is what I have been calling for over the past 2 weeks, a position which you will appreciate may appear to differ slightly from that of the leadership of my party. Speaking in the House of Commons chamber last night, I stated clearly my support for an urgent ceasefire cessation of hostilities in Gaza, Israel. It was in the debate on the King's Speech, as there were amendments laid down by the opposition parties, including from Labour and the SNP, in relation to the war in Gaza, Israel. I focused on the reality of making this happen, the need for Hamas to release all of the Israeli hostages, and I believe the need for Israel to release all its illegally detained Palestinian prisoners. Only then, I believe, would a ceasefire be sustainable. That is why the Labour amendment was so important, because it was realistic, it was honest, and it remains possible. It could even materialise next week. Clearly, I know that some of you may be disappointed that I abstained in the vote for the SNP amendment, which simply called for a ceasefire. But I did so because I wanted to be honest and vote for the most realistic amendment on the table, the Labour amendment, in the genuine belief that it is the only route to bring about a ceasefire cessation of hostilities. It outlined the pragmatic steps needed to reach the goal of the ceasefire which I remain committed to, namely the immediate release of all hostages, the lifting of siege conditions, and longer humanitarian pauses. For a ceasefire to come about, both sides need to accept it. Currently, neither do. They will, however, support humanitarian pauses. We must, as I say, first concentrate on making these of longer duration and more frequent as a necessary step that will help open the door to peace. I do not believe that the SNP amendment which called for a ceasefire captured the reality of these steps essential to bring about an end to this current conflict, which is why I couldn't vote for it. I would reiterate the critical need for the UK to work in support of President Biden and Secretary of State Blinken. They are the only people capable of bringing about a ceasefire, and we need them to succeed. If they fail, the likelihood of a Trump presidency becomes real, and then there will be no hope of a genuine two-state solution, a secure Israel and a sovereign Palestine. What we would see is more terrorism and regional fracturing. Be assured that I remain committed to helping bring about a ceasefire and lasting peace in the Middle East, and will continue calling for this as the MP for our area. Again, I appreciate you contacting me on the most distressing issue. I sincerely appreciate your views and always seek to represent my constituents' views in the best way I can, especially when the decisions are extremely difficult, such as the votes yesterday. That was a lengthy response. He put some work into that, or one of his staffers did. We can give him dues for that, I guess, along with the fact he responded literally a day after the vote, though whether he had this already prepared to go out to the inevitable question of why did you do this, I can imagine it is an email that'll have been copied and pasted a few times for sure. That is so often what MPs do, after all. But let's dig into this. He wants a ceasefire. Well, he didn't vote for one. Western is, however, one of those MPs who signed Richard Bergen's early day motion calling for one prior to the King's Speech, where after Starmer said anyone re-signing it, signing the since the King's Speech wiped it out the first time, would be sacked. So Western didn't sign it again. Clearly Job, before conscious, came in at that point, and he can hide behind the humanitarian pause excuse as the better option now, all he likes. He wanted a ceasefire, and he put his name to one at one point. You can't go, I want a ceasefire, when you've blatantly chosen to put your job first, as seems quite obvious and clear to a great many people, not least the constituent who wrote to you on this. Why did you bother to sign the EDM in the first place as you felt a ceasefire was not going to work? You're exposed, and no amount of recognising the horrors of what is happening in Gaza is excusing that. If anything, that underlines how awful your abstention actually was. Sure, there's plenty of platitudes there. He actually does comment on hostages being held on both sides, which is good, which is notable for a Labour figure. But let's move on to where it gets a little more interesting, because despite signing that EDM, Western thinks it is down to nations of influence to engineer a ceasefire. So that sounds a little bit like passing the buck to me. Not our job, sorry, but I don't agree with that. For one, we have a historic responsibility to see peace in the region, since this country did so much to help engineer this Jewish state within Palestine way back when, and much of the fallout from that is on this country. As much as I'm all for not interfering in other countries' problems as a rule, following the US as we always seem to, in this case the interference was done back in the 1930s and 1940s. The mess just hasn't ever been cleaned up. It's just got worse. For another, to say we aren't a country of influence is pretty dishonest as well. A ceasefire could have been called back when the UN Security Council convened, at which you might remember the USA voted against it so the killing could continue. But the UK abstained. Now sure, it would have been Tory directive there, but Starmer and co have just followed them all the way on this, are adhering to US foreign policy as our own, and Starmer is accused of waiting for Biden to shift before Labour will. And actually, Western make reference to Biden and US Secretary of State Blinken in his email here, so he knows this. He knows his party is following the US lead here and not taking the lead itself, but it could. Because just like the US, the UK is a permanent UN Security Council member. In other words, we don't ever get shuffled out of this council. And if we chose to actually be leaders, we could exert some influence there. It's a choice of both the Tories and Labour to hide behind the US right now. And the moment Biden decides the time is right for a ceasefire, which will be presumably when Gaza is a wasteland and access to those suspiciously convenient oil and gas reserves off the Gazan coast is assured, that'll be when our leaderships shift as well. I don't really want to be led by the US, thank you. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. Oddly enough, I'm not able to. Worse, he brings up the notion that if Biden's plans fail and we don't support him, a Trump presidency becomes more likely. That, in all honesty, is America's problem. It matters no more to us here in the UK than it does the innocent people of Gaza right now. We have no sway over what American voters choose to do down the line than they do over what ours do, though perhaps they might think otherwise when our leaders go how high when Genocide Joe says jump. Anyway, back to Western's reply. He doesn't feel a ceasefire is possible until all hostages are released. That surely would be an obvious step in getting a ceasefire at all to most of us. He then pivots to Starmer's humanitarian pause and Labour's amendment as honest and easily implemented. I know how they say this. Surely the same people who you would have to talk to about a ceasefire are the same ones you'd have to talk to get a pause. Let's be honest though, Hamas aren't going to bomb aid coming in for their own people. So really it means you only have to talk to Israel in this case, so it's half the work, isn't it? But unfortunately it doesn't stop the killing, so there's nothing honest or pragmatic about it at all. It simply doesn't go far enough, and it is insulting to people's intelligence that you, a guy who signed an EDM for a ceasefire, think this is now the correct response, because you've only taken this approach since Starmer threatened your job. If we don't follow the US here, if Biden's administration collapses and Trump comes in, Western seems to reckon we'd see more terrorism there. We're already seeing a genocide, a driving out of the Palestinian people under the guise of taking out Hamas. The Gazan people are slowly being driven into the Sinai desert, ethnic cleansing, and then what is left of Gaza will be seized by Israel in yet another land grab, because we haven't seen enough of that in history at all, have we? More room for more settlers. We know what will happen. We've been watching it play out for decades and done nothing but sit on our hands. And you think there's a worse than that? This was a well-written response from Matt Western, but filled with every excuse going when you dig through it. We can't change anything. We can't stop the fighting. We can get a bit of aid in and make it look like we're trying, but really we're just waiting for our next set of instructions from the US. That is what it feels like right now. For people demanding our leaders lead, none of them are. And that's why excuses have to be made. For an opposition MP to be making these sorts of excuses, though, when really the opposition party should have it made in this instance, especially one with the polling lead they've already got. They should be shredding the government for what they're doing and winning the support of ordinary people appalled at what we're witnessing. Instead, they take the government line too, reinforcing to people like me, who have said it for ages that voting Labour to get the Tories out won't make any difference if the politics don't change, are being proved completely right to have been saying that, because there's literally no difference here. If MPs don't like being forcefully held to account for voting against the cessation of killing of innocent people, then they really shouldn't be abstaining on such matters. Surely that is a no-brainer. I don't condone any violence or any desecration that's been threatened against or happening against various MPs for their choice of vote. But I have zero sympathy for them either being held properly to account by the people who put them where they are. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, there's a video recommendation where thankfully 56 Labour MPs had the wherewithal to do what was right on the night. But when this is just 28% of Labour MPs, you can see what a state the party is really in. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks. Right, so Jeremy Hunt's plans for benefit claimants as the government returns to a shirkers versus workers mantra, yet another culture war, folks, are set to make life even worse for disabled people who are, of course, amongst such claimants, but always get left out of the narrative, because otherwise a lot of people wouldn't support what the government's doing, save those who think people can, I don't know, walk off an amputation, or long COVID is just a bad cough. We've all met those types, haven't we? And for them, a policy like this is red meat. When you add into the equation that Hunt is planning tax cuts in the autumn statement too, the cruel senselessness of what they're planning to do really does become a bit blatant and obvious. But if you were also hoping this would surely be something that Labour would oppose, you'd be very wrong about that as well, since Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, the god-awful Blairite Liz Kendall, is on record as saying Hunt's plans, which include stripping free prescriptions from those who will now be forced to try and find work, ill health or no, doesn't go far enough. Right, so Jeremy Hunt, living up to being that word he rhymes with again, has been announcing benefit reforms that are completely unnecessary, contrary to common sense, blatantly cruel, and born out of sheer ignorance. Appealing to the ignorant right wing of this country who love to see misery being heaped down on other people, mostly I think to make them feel better about their own crappy existences. In the firing line this time are those who have, whether still on the old legacy benefit system, been ruled unfit for work and are in the Support Group for Employment and Support Allowance, ESA, or found unfit for work as universal credit claimants in the Limited Capability for Work group, because Hunt is basically looking at scrapping those groups in all intents and purposes. There's too many people being deemed unfit for work, you see. Therefore, we'll now deem them all fit for work. Hunt is targeting what he calls those people languishing on the long-term sick. But his plans mean the notion of long-term or short-term become irrelevant, because even new claimants will get caught up in this. Therefore, it is anyone who is deemed as just sick, regardless of what illness or what sickness, what issues they may have. This could include people waiting for operations and are unable to work until they've had it. Not just people with ongoing issues like cancer, for example, or long COVID, let alone those with ongoing lifelong disabilities. Because to Hunt, in his words, they're all work-shy benefit shirkers. The one bit I've looked for clarification on over this and found nothing is how carers for all these people will be affected, since Hunt can legislate changes to who the law sees as sick or not, who is capable of work and who isn't. But illnesses and disabilities don't change just because legislation has, and people who had to give up work to care for those who still need it will still be in that boat of having to care for people Hunt might now decide are capable for work despite them blatantly not being. Making matters worse, if you're put in that position and can't find work, then Hunt is going to withdraw your access to free healthcare, dentistry, and access to help to heat your home, effectively deciding the way to get people into work now is with even tougher sanctions on people who were previously protected from such measures, and doing everything, frankly, to harm their health even further. This isn't a helping hand, this is whipping people like animals until they do what you want. The treatment of disabled people over the last 13 years of Tory rule has seen 330,000 people die, so making the measures even tougher and targeting those most ill will certainly see more people die, and the Tories must know this. These plans will kill people, and these genocidal maniacs in power will do it anyway. Worse still, though, is that Hunt is now also planning tax breaks. Just rub it in a little bit more. Slash benefit funding by making the most ill work or die trying, and meanwhile he can give more cash away to the rich. Public services are on their backsides. This country's been starved of investment for years and years, and instead of keeping taxation where it is, or raising it on those able to afford it to allow more public spending to fix those public services, Hunt is going to slash taxes instead, and with both of these pieces of news coming out in the last week, it is impossible not to say doing one is paying for the other. Hunt's excuse, of course, is that inflation has come down, giving him room to spend. But that simply means the rate of prices rising has slowed down. It hasn't given the Treasury more money. It doesn't work that way. Prices are still going up, but the Tories do love to portray inflation as some kind of a tax, when it is nothing of the sort. Prices will still rise, so we'll give more money away and slash income so more people struggling are going to struggle even more than they already are. It is economic idiocy. It is cruel. People will suffer. People will die. The economy will suffer because these people aren't spending in it like they need to keep the economy afloat, and the Tories couldn't give a damn. So please, let's get them out of power and change the government. I hear you cry, but wait. Do not get too excited about Labour coming in, because the right-wing idiot Starmer has put in charge of work and pensions in his party the rancid Liz Kendall, who has said that Hunt's plans don't go far enough. Of course, the Murdoch Times covered this story, but it was the analysis at the end of the article which stood out, because this is where input from Starmer's team was added into the context. And Liz Kendall apparently said, once Labour, or the narrative, I should say, from Liz Kendall in the paper, as the paper interpreted it, said, once Labour might have been tempted to oppose the plans as cruel, allowing the Tories to paint them as being on the side of benefit scroungers, under Keir Starmer, and particularly his Blairite new shadow work and pension secretary Liz Kendall, Labour has taken the opposite view. Kendall's criticism is that the government is not going far enough. That creates a massive problem, because not only does that mean Labour aren't going to save you if you're on benefits, particularly if you're long-term sick, and let's not forget here actually that 40% of universal credit claimants here are already in work, so their lives are just going to be made harder too, even though they are working. But then actually, by being too afraid to oppose Tory cruelty in case they get labelled friends of this benefit scrounger picture that the Tories have painted, they're encouraging the Tories to go even further than this. Labour should be making the case for opposing this, and why? That those who are disabled and long-term sick should be looked after by a civilised society. That reform is needed because universal credit doesn't work and has messed up so many people's lives with its maladministration, not to mention the rollout of which has been years and years overdue. It's been a complete lash-up, in fact. But no, they just join in with the government because they don't lead. There's no leader here. And quite what Starmer will do if he has to make decisions should he form the next government and become Prime Minister, I really don't know. But it's hardly much of a stretch of the imagination that it'll be Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson behind the scenes, wearing him like a glove puppet. The Tories' sick, unnecessary and gleeful cruelty to those with the least, those who need the most help, goes on. Now being cheered on by the opposition instead of being opposed. Again, I'll say it. Go ahead. Justify voting Labour to get the Tories out. Because actually nothing is going to bloody change, regardless of which of those two parties takes over and is running government next. Take your vote elsewhere and vote for actual change if change is what you really want. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please do like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where the media is equally as complicit in driving the scroungers narrative, with one of the worst being the odious Andrew Pearce, who a few months back was calling them an army of shirkers with their Sky TV channels and their cans of beer in the morning, and they are the real threat to people's lives. This narrative has got to change. It has to be opposed, because it is a safety net we all might need one day, though we hope we won't. And it's increasingly having bigger and bigger holes punched in it. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers, folks.